on section 2.2. We're doing example 3, and I am going to twist your little brains. Oh my goodness, they are going to hurt after we talk about this one. We're going to do something called analyzing the truth value of a conditional statement. So we've been building on knowledge, trying to figure out, what are conditional statements, what are we looking for, how do we write one, etc. So at the very top, I want you to pay special attention. In fact, let's go ahead and box this one in because I really want you to see this, okay? A conditional statement has a truth value of either true or false. Okay, so it's one or the other. It's not anything in the middle. The only time a conditional statement is considered to be false is when the hypothesis happens to be true, but the conclusion is false. That is the only time. And so you may want to highlight that, okay? Pick out a highlighter and let's go over that right here. This is very, very important for you to remember. Okay? Because if that's the only time it's false, then it doesn't matter if the hypothesis is true, then, and the conclusion is true, then it's going to be true. If the hypothesis is true and the conclusion is false, all you need to show is one counterexample where that hypothesis is true and the conclusion is false. And that's how you show that the whole thing is false, okay? The only time it's false is when the hypothesis is true and the conclusion is false, okay? It's very, 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 very important. We're going to go through each one of these. I'm going to leave you one at the very bottom to do on your own, okay? All right. Now, if you end up having a conditional statement that you've deemed false, then you need to provide a counterexample, okay? So that's kind of a catch there that's in the instructions. Okay, now remember, if the hypothesis is false, the conditional statement is true regardless of the truth value of the conclusion. Okay, let me say that again. If the hypothesis is false, the conditional statement is true regardless of the truth value of the conclusion. This is super important. If you need to write that down, go ahead and write that down. I'm going to put it out here. If hype is false, then conditional statement is true. Okay? And that's regardless of whatever the conclusion is. Doesn't matter if the conclusion is true or false. If the hypothesis is false, your conditional statement is automatically true. We'll try and go into that a little bit more. We may need to have a little class discussion on this. I can already sense it because I'm, in my own mind, I'm going, how is this possible? How is this possible? Okay, so let's look at example 3. Letter A. If today is Sunday, then tomorrow is Monday. So we've got our if-then statement, and when this particular hypothesis is true, the conclusion is also true, okay? So we would say, yeah, that when it's true, I'm not saying it's true today. In fact, today is Monday. But when it's Sunday, then the next day is Monday. So they're both true, which means the overall conditional is true. Okay? So we're going to measure each part. We're going to look at the veracity, the truth of the hypothesis, the veracity of the conclusion, and we're going to make a final assessment on this. All right? If an angle is obtuse, then it has a measure of 100 degrees. Okay? So some angles, when an angle is obtuse, that's true. Okay? An angle can be obtuse. But in this case, the condition is going to be false. And we can provide a counterexample, can we not? And so our counterexample could be any other obtuse angle that's not 100 degrees. So this is not 100 degrees, but it's still obtuse. So clearly, we have a counterexample. We provided that. And so remember what I said at the beginning. A conditional statement is false only when the hypothesis is true and the conclusion is false. That's very important. So this is the only time, it's this type of situation where we can say, okay, well, this would be a false conditional. And so we can write it like that. That's the only time is if we get a true hypothesis and a false conclusion. Okay? Now letter C says if an odd number is divisible by 2. Well, it's not. Odd numbers are not divisible by 2, then they never will be. Okay? Then 8 is a perfect square. Well, no, 8 is not a perfect square. Okay, that's not on our list of perfect squares we learned last year in algebra. But the thing is, we're going to say the conditional is true. Now this is the part that blows everybody's mind. Okay, the only time that we can classify a conditional as being false is if the hypothesis is true, but the conclusion is false. When the hypothesis is false, then the conditional is always true. And that's that note that I had you write right here. Okay, so I wanted to point that out to you. And so what your book says is an odd number is never divisible by 2, so the hypothesis is false. That's what we said. The number 8 is not a perfect square, so the conclusion is false. However, the conditional is true because the hypothesis is false. So anytime you have a false hypothesis, that automatically makes the conditional true. Why? I have no idea. We may have to kind of simmer through that and talk about it and kind of sit on that for a little while, but that is definitely what we know to be true. Okay? So if you have any false hypotheses, conditional is always true. If you have a true hypothesis and a true conclusion, then you have a true conditional statement. But if you have a true, like in letter B, a true hypothesis but a false conclusion, that's the only time that you're going to get a false conditional statement. So this is a tough one. I will give you that, and we can talk about this a little bit more in the morning. All right, so I'm going to give you a bonus point for you to look at this conditional. If a number is odd, then it is divisible by 3. And let me know if it's true or false. And if it is false, then you have to provide a counterexample. So make sure you definitely do that. All right, bring your questions to class tomorrow.